Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another session on computer fundamentals. What we plan to discuss today is actually building of algorithms, coming up with solutions. Problem statements that I plan to take up today are going to be very, very simple. So probably you don't even have to worry about defining the problem. Problem will be simple, straightforward. The statement itself will be 1 line, 2 line statement. We'll keep it simple initially. So if you have an idea in your mind as to how would you go about solving that particular problem, it will be necessary for you to express your idea on a piece of paper. So our objective is to express that particular idea on a piece of paper. We have to express it, represent it on a piece of paper. Now in this case, we have some tools in which we'll draw. We could take flowcharts, we could work with pseudocodes, or whatever it is. So probably you will not even have to do too much of investigation. We'll quickly discuss when the problem statement has been given. But in the real life, the problem statements that you will come across will run into several pages, at times several hundred pages. So the defining the problem, understanding the requirement specifications, they'll be very, very challenging. But to begin with, I'll be taking very simple, straightforward question where it is as good as I defining the problem. But then we'll look at the specifications very correctly, requirements, what are the requirements, and then we'll build an algorithm to fulfill that particular requirement. So that would be our approach to go ahead with. Our focus today, I said, the most complex code that you see in the world is a combination of 3 basic constructs, that is sequence, selection, and iteration. So today we'll focus on the simplest one, that is sequence. But then, why do you write programs? We said there is a problem, and that problem has to be resolved. And we want to make use of computers to resolve that particular problem, to provide solution. So you want your operations to happen on the computer. Now, when I say operations to happen on the computer, is the computer going to perform operations like drilling, sweeping, cleaning? No. So your computer is actually going to carry out operations, and those operations will involve manipulation of data. Will involve manipulation of data. To begin with, these are basic code operations: create the data, update the data, modify the data, delete the data. These are kind of operations that every program that you come across anywhere in your life perform. You go on to book a ticket. So what happens? They register, take your records. So they have created a record. You cancel your booking, they may probably delete the record. Or you want to make some changes in the record. So basically, there are 4 code operations that we perform: create, update, modify, and delete. That's what we do. But there is some data that is involved, and we are actually going to perform operation on the data. Are you wondering, are we going out? Are we diverting this discussion? No. The very reason why we write a program is there is some data, and that data needs to be manipulated. That data needs to be processed. If there is no data, probably you will not require any program. The program exists to carry out operation on the data. Program exists to carry out operation on the data. So if there is no program, you don't need, if there is no data, we don't need a program. Do you agree to this? What I'm trying to say? It's a strong statement that I'm making. If there is no data, I do not need a program. Is that case true? Have you come across an application, a program where there is no data involved? It could be anything. It could be gaming, it could be ticket booking, it could be banking operation. Have anybody come across an application where there is no data involved? No. If you have come across, put a tick. अगर आपको आया ऐसा कोई application where there is no data, you have seen an application, just put a tick. If not, put a cross. Maybe an Ankit are still thinking, is data necessary for a program? All of you agree. So there is no reason, we never come across any application where there is no data. The very reason, mark my statement, the very reason why we write programs is because there is some data and that data needs to be manipulated. You need to perform some kind of changes on that particular data. So the program exists to manipulate data. Program exists to manipulate data. So your data also needs to be represented in the computers. We discussed abstraction. We said we'll capture information. Remember that? 4 pillars of computational thinking. One is abstraction. We said we'll only capture relevant information. Okay, that's good. You're trying to describe a person. You're trying to describe a mobile phone. You're trying to describe a process. You're trying to describe a transaction. But that description will know data. What else do we have? So when you describe anything, there is nothing but data that is being described, represented. When you exist in your college system, you physically do not go into the college system. It's your data that is stored in the college system. When you want to book a ticket, you are not there inside the system. Your details are stored inside the ticket, inside that system, saying that this fellow with this information, this name, this Aadhaar card number, or this PAN card number has booked this particular ticket. So the things that we see in the real world, they have their representation inside the computer in form of data. We call them as records. A lot of time we call them as a record. So the things in the real world exist in the computer system or are represented in the computer system in form of a record. And record consists of data. Name, address, phone number, if it's a person kind of thing. Yeah, if it's a transaction, when that transaction happened, with debit or credit tha, kya tha. So it is just piece of information. So again, listen very carefully. All the things that we see in the real world, which we touch, feel, use, whatever it is, when we create the representation inside the computers, it's nothing but the information about those things, the data about that particular thing, that to relevant data is captured and stored inside the computer to represent that thing in the given system. And we don't take all information. We had talked about data abstraction. We'll only capture information which is relevant in that context. And only that much information will be captured and stored. So if I have to store the data into the computer, I'll require something. In the program, if I have to represent data, I'll require something. Because this interaction with the data or the operation of the data will be carried out by the program. So within the program, I would like to represent that particular data. Data is not of same type. I have your photo, that's a different thing. I have your name, that's a different thing. I have recorded your voice, that's a different thing. Rather, it's a different type of data. So data has various forms. So if I ask you to define data, how would you go about defining data? Yes, anybody? How would you go ahead defining data? If I ask you, chalo, come on, define data for me. Yes, anybody?
Sir, data is a collection of objects.
Data is collection of objects, and that's not correct.
Sir,
Okay, let's talk about Ankita's answer. Data is collection of objects, he said. So now, if this is one object, this is another object, correct? So collection of this object is data.
information about object.
Information about the object. Okay. So when I use the word information, what do you mean by that? Now you have to be again careful between the term information and data. Usme bhi hame you have to be careful.
The type of information which can store, that is data. Type of information.
It is better than what Ankita said. Ankita said it's collection of objects. These objects will not form the data. As Rohit is trying to say, information about this object can be data. If I say volume of this particular, what is this flask that I have, the price of this particular mobile. Okay, all that will constitute data. Mobile is not the data. This flask is not the data. The objects are not data. The information that you have captured about this object is data. Is that correct, Ankita? Is this object a data? Or the information about this object is data? She has freezed her issue. Others? Is the mobile phone the data or the information about that is data?
So data is characteristics of any entity.
Data is characteristics of some entity. Okay. Looks like you have looked into OOPS concepts or something like that. Okay. Characteristics of entity. That means properties, correct? Characteristics means properties. Like the size of the mobile phone, the price of the mobile phone. See, these are properties, correct? But again, if I ask you, these are characteristics, but what is data?
Sir, collection of facts.
Very correct. That's the most precise. It's collection of facts and figures. Now that could be anything. Price of the mobile is also a fact, and the value is the figure. Okay, it's collection of facts and figures. Okay, the most simplest definition of data could be collection of facts and figures, not just facts and figures. That could be the simplest definition of data that you will come across. Now, how is it different than the word information that Rohit used?
Information.
Sir, information can be hypothetical or myth, anything, but facts are relevant information.
Facts are relevant information. Okay, you're very near to the answer.
Sorry, sir, I didn't hear you.
You are very near to the answer.
Precise information is data.
Precise information is data. Okay. If it is not precise, that's not data. That's correct. But I asked you, then how is information different? He said any fact and figure is data. Hold on. Any fact and figure is data, but not the data that is of our interest. We said we had talked about concept of data abstraction. We'll capture only that information, only that piece of information that is of our interest. We'll only capture those characteristics that are of interest. We'll ignore the rest. Okay. So I'm trying to understand what exactly is the difference between data and information. Yes, Ashish, you're trying to say something.
Sir, information can't be used for processing it. But if information is translated into different form, it will be more convenient to process. This is the data.
That is data. It's exactly opposite. Data is collection of facts and figures. Okay, so I had birth date of all of you, suppose. That is a collection of facts and figures. Everybody's name and birth date. And I could extract information out of it saying who is the youngest in the class, who is the oldest in the class. So what has happened? That's the information that we have retrieved out of that collection of facts and figures. There could be questions like anything. It could be like who is born in the month of April, so we can get party. Okay, now April starts tomorrow. Or who is in March, whose party is pending. So we could collect that particular piece of information. So now with this example, can you redefine the term information? And I'll come to Ashish, what you said, why this may not be exactly the case true that I've explained. So I said I had, say there are 13 of you, and I had name and birth date of all of you. And then I carried out some operation. I wrote a program, and that program gave me an information which said the youngest person in the class is Sarthak, and the oldest person in the class is Sairam. So I got that particular piece of information. So what has happened in this particular thing? What has the program done?
So first we collected the raw data and then carried out an operation. After that we get the information. Is it?
What is information?
Processed raw data.
Processed data. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Let's even not use
processed
the
data.
word raw. It is nothing but process data. So information is only collection of facts and figures. Information is just collection of facts and figures, but not any fact and figure. It is such a collection of facts and figures which can be processed to produce information. Take down the definition. What is data? Data is not just collection of any facts and figures. Say it's facts and figures. See, we are supposed to capture the name and the birth date of the students, and in between you have captured information like India, Pakistan, 192. Now, will that make any sense to that particular collection of facts and figures? If I have such numbers in between India, Pakistan, 192, will that make any sense? Although it is fact or it's a figure, it's some text, but is it relevant? Can we call it as a data for us? So what is data for me may be garbage for you. And what is garbage for you may be data for me. So taking into consideration the operation that we plan to perform. If the data is such that will enable us to carry out certain operations on it, processing on it, so that we can generate relevant output out of it, information out of it. So data is just a collection of facts and figures, but such a collection of facts and figures on which we can carry out some operation to produce some meaningful information. So what is information? It's nothing but processed data. Make a note of it. Data, collection of facts and figures, collection of facts and figures can be processed to produce information, which can be processed to produce information. And information is processed data, data on which there is some processing that we have carried out. Information is processed data. Let us come back to the point that Ashish made. He tried to say information is something on which we cannot carry out process. And that means data is something on which we carry out process. Now let's try and understand this particular thing and get a clarity about it. Okay, assume Aditya is a principal of a college and Rahul is his assistant. And suppose that right now admissions are going on. Listen to me very carefully. Yeah? Or you all are his assistant. Or I am the principal, you all are my assistant. Each of you is my assistant. Admissions are going on. For some course, there are 100 seats in a college. For some course, there are 100 seats in a college. So all the 100 students have filled in the form. So we have got the data, relevant data. Are we going to ask the student to tell us for admission when he's applying for a particular course? Are you going to ask him your favorite actor, your favorite actress? Are you going to capture that information?
No.
Your Insta handle? No, we will definitely not ask those things.
No.
Right? So we have captured appropriate information that is there in the form. So that collection of form is data for me.
Yes.
Okay, that collection of form is data for me. Now I tell all of you, you are my assistant. I tell them, we want to give admission to the students. Now look at this, we want to give admission to the student. And criteria for admission is like marks. So assuming marks are only criteria, gender, nahi, caste, nahi, nothing, marks are the only criteria for which we're going to, based on which we're going to take admission. So I asked them to display the list on the board for admission. So what will you do? What kind of operations will you do on this data? What will you display on the list?
Mark.
Pardon?
Mark.
Think about Rohit. I have just displayed marks. And there are 10 students having same marks. Marks display करने से क्या होगा?
Percentage.
Okay, I display only percentage
Sure.
on the screen.
Sir, name, roll number, and
Roll number, they have not yet been given admission. So probably name and percentage.
yes.
Yes.
Okay, so we have created a list of names and percentage. Okay, but now the data that we had collected that had the address, the phone numbers, and the marks that he has secured and the percentage that he has secured, all that collection was there on that piece of paper, correct? The forms that we had filled in. So that was our collection. We carried out some operation. Now, what is an operation that you have carried out over here? Two operations we have carried out. Can you figure out what are the two? Or what are the operations that we have carried out?
Selection.
Pardon?
Selection. Sorting.
Sorting is an operation that we have carried out, correct? We have listed all the 1,000 students who have applied. And also given saying only 100 seats are there. Is it necessary that every student's name which appears in the list will be taking an admission? But then you give them 2 days, 3 days time to take admission? Yes? And your waiting list is displayed, first 100 and then rest is waiting list for admission. Yes or no?
Yes.
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 So what did you do? You took those forms, you carried out some kind of operation on the data, and what you have done, you have only created list of students in descending order of their marks. What you have done is you have created only the basic objective क्या था यहाँ? Generate a list of students in descending order of their marks. That's what you have done.
Yes, sir.
Admission वो secondary है. वो the principal has to do whatever he has to do. Principal has asked you to generate a list, so we'll definitely generate a list in descending order of the marks, because the one who has secured highest marks should get the admission first. Somebody said we should have names and percentages. So just by having names and percentages in any order, that will not help, na? And sorting will also not help. जिसको सबसे कम मार्क मिले उसका नाम क्या सबसे ऊपर रखोगे? So you have to be precise. Okay, Kaustubh said we'll sort and we'll display, but we should sort in descending order based on their percentage mark, and we should create a list. So we have created a list of students in descending order of their percentage. Mark my word, we have created a list of students in descending order of their percentage. Okay. Now, this particular list that we have generated, okay, how many people are present inside this list?
100.
100.
When
We
you
don't
as the
know.
pardon?
We don't know, sir. We haven't numbered them.
Okay, yes.
Why I told you there are 1,000 applications. So if I as a principal, if I tell you, give me the list of students in descending order of their percentage, are you going to take a decision कि उसमें से किसको admission देना है नहीं देना है?
No, sir.
No, sir.
So what is the process that you have carried out?
Sorting.
Sorting in descending order,
Yes, sir.
descending order of the percentage.
Yes, sir.
So one operation you have completed and you have submitted that list to the principal. So I get that particular list. Why have I taken that particular list? Yes, yes. Why did the principal ask for this particular list?
Sir, to select a few number of students who have scored good marks.
Correct. So that few will be how much?
Sir, that would depend on percentile.
No.
Number of seats available.
Number of seats available. Now there are 100 seats. The percentage will not decide how many people will I fill in. The seats which are available, that will decide how many people can I fill in. I already told you there are 100 seats and there are 1,000 applications. So now, look, Ashish, I'm trying to answer your question, your statement. I'm trying to counter. So principal first asked the MIS guy to generate list of students in descending order of their marks. So the entire forms of 1,000 forms were taken. They were processed to create a list of students where we have only name and percentage marks. In descending order of their marks, that list has been created. Now, what will the principal do? What would the operation that principal do here? Next step.
Remove the top 100%.
So that's what Sairam was saying, selection. He will only select or filter out the top 100 students. Their percentage marks could be same also. Who knows? So the top 100 students will filter out, and that will be a short list that he will display on the board. He's not going to display all the 1,000 students on the board. Rather, what he'll do is he'll display only the shortlisted students who will have the first chance to take admission within this week. And if you don't take within this week, then next week another list will be displayed.
Yes, yes.
So what is the second operation that has been carried out?
Selection.
Selection, filtering. You could say anything. You have filtered out the first 100 students. The rest of the students you have ignored. So the point that I'm coming to, that you others must have missed out, is output of one process has become input for another process.
Yes.
So what was information stage 1? When we sorted the marks of the students and created that entire sorted list, the output was the sorted list of students. That is an output. The output at one stage has become input for another stage where we are carried out operation of filtering. So we discussed what is data. Now what is happening over here? We are now proceeding further. We have some data. This is collection of those 1,000 forms that we have. These 1,000 forms are now being processed. These 1,000 forms that we have, they are now being processed. We are carrying out operation of sorting on these forms. Sorting. Okay. I'm just writing sorting in short, but it is sorting based on percentage. Sorting. After sorting, you got some other output. And that is nothing but list of students we got sorting operation. So sorting is an operation, so that's a process. So I'm planning to carry out some kind of process. So suppose this is the process of sorting that we are carrying out. Let's say this is the process of sorting. So this data now becomes the input, and sorting is the process that we have carried on that particular data. So sorting is the process that we have carried on. So sorting is the process, and this was your data. Suppose this was your data. On that data, we have carried out operation of sorting. So let me keep this word sorting aside, and I'll write it inside only. Here I can write it. So here we have carried out a process, and the process is about sorting. After carrying out this process of sorting, we get some output. We get some output. We are getting some output. And this output that we get after sorting this particular data is the sorted list of students. Data contain all the information, the phone number, the address, and other things. And after sorting, I have only limited information that I'm really interested in. So I'm not going to have all the data again over here. Rather, I'll have what I was interested in. So what I was interested in, I was interested in the list of students in descending order of their percentage. So here what I have is list of students. But that is list of all the students in descending order of their percentage. Okay, that's list of all the students in descending order of their percentage. So that's what we have. Names of students in descending order of their percentage. Now that I have got the names of students in descending order of their percentage, I got names of students in descending order of their percentage. We now go on to carry out the next operation. And the next operation is, I could say, next process is that of filtering, is that of selection. You could say anything. I'll say we'll now go ahead carrying out the other operation. So there's another operation that we are trying to carry out. And this operation next process that we are carrying out is that of filtering. You may say selection, whatever it is. So we have filtered out, and post filtering, what we have got is another list of students, and that's the short list of the students. So what we have got is a short list. Okay, only the top 100 students, because there are only 100 seats in our college. So this is a short list of the students, a short list chapters. So what we have is a short list. Okay. Short list of the students, or list of selected students, or top 100 students. Short list. So what is happening? We have this data. We have the data goes to a process. It generates output. So output at one stage has now become input at another stage. So what I want to show is, says this is your input, and I want you, all of you, to take this diagram in your own way, just to understand input at one stage can become output at one stage can become input at another stage. So while this is input, the second thing is process. Okay, the second thing that we have is a process. So this is input, and what we have over here is process. So ये process है. This is process. And next is information or output, I'll say. This is output. Output. And this is output. And then this is again another process. And then what we have over here is again output. Let's say information. And this was also information. Now tell me whether this is suppose process 1 and this is process 2. So while this is output for process 1 or output of process 1, is output of process 1, but at the same time it is input for process 2. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
So
Yes.
what we are calling output is nothing but input for another process. What we are calling output is nothing but input for another process. So the point is, if this is the list that we are talking about, that was an output of operation of sorting, but that becomes input for another process, that is of filtering. So output at one stage can become input at another stage. So don't say information can be further processed to generate another information. Okay. So in computing, this is the basic flow diagram that we are going to come across. So what is a flow diagram? We will have input. That input will go through a process to generate an output. The process is the one which will carry out manipulation of the data. So while data is collection of facts and figures, process manipulates the data to generate information. Process manipulates the data to generate an information. So what have you noted last? आपने क्या note कर लिखा है last?
Information is processed data.
Information is processed. Saram is asking whether these symbols have some meaning. Hold on, not now. I'll slowly come to meaningful symbols. Currently, I just did it randomly, but there are ways to represent every operation, but that I'll show you as we go ahead. Currently, in this diagram, that was not the case. So let's write.
Sir, ER diagrams.
No, not ER diagrams. ER diagrams are meant for entity relationships, and that's far more complex. Here, we are actually going to go ahead with far more simpler things. Okay, we are not going to do some database design or something like that right now, but later, yes. Later in the course, yes, but not during logic development. ER, extended ER, and that's for that you need to know object-oriented concepts, inheritance, compositions, and association, and so on. So that's ER diagram. We can actually represent all those things, but then object-oriented concepts and other things like far away right now for us. Okay, currently we're just talking about simple programs, simple approach of solving the problems. Okay, right now. Definition is process. So if I ask you to define process, how will you define process?
Set of actions.
Set of actions. Okay.
Operation performed.
On
Data.
data to generate information, correct? So if
So
data
step by
was-
step.
step by step, whatever it is, operation you are performing, correct? So operation performed means what? You're manipulating the data. Operations means what? You're carrying out some transformation, you're doing some manipulation. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's write process. Let's define the term process. Manipulation carried out on the input data. Carried out on the input data to generate information. Manipulations carried out on input data to generate information. Everybody? So output of a process is
Result.
output of process information. Input of the process is
Data.
Data.
let's see whether this is correct or not. Let's see this is correct or not. I was the principal. Rahul was my assistant. And I asked Rahul, give me a list of all the students in descending order of their marks. Correct? I told him, give me a list of all students in descending order of their marks. So Rahul is going to carry out that process. What is the process that he's going to carry out?
Sorting in descending order.
Right. So he carried out sorting in descending order. But then what he did, he carried out sorting in descending order by the surname. Zahir Khan first and Ajit Agarkar last. AA. And Zahir Khan ka Z. First. Ajit Agarwal ka Ajit came last and Zahir Khan came first. Z first, descending order. And he gives me that particular list, which is list of all the students in descending order of their names. I had asked in percentage and he gives me name. Now tell me, was that list created without processing of data? राहुल, जो लिस्ट आपने जनरेट की है, was it created without processing the data? क्या आपने उस 1000 फॉर्म में से किसी स्टूडेंट को स्किप कर लिया है क्या?
No, sir.
Then will you call it information?
Sir,
Yes.
information for the first process and data for the second process.
Sure. Is it still an information? Everybody
No, sir.
agrees to what he's saying. He says it's information for the first process. Is that the case? Is it information? Who was the
It
consumer
is
of that?
not
Hold on, who was the
relevant.
consumer of that information? Who was going to use that information? Rahul ने जो output report बनाया, who's going to use that information?
Principal.
Principal. Correct? Somebody was saying, who was it? Bhagisha or Ankita? कौन कह रहा बोल रहा बात कर रहा था अभी?
Sir, me.
Tell me, what are you trying to say?
Relevant information is not
it
there.
relevant? What Rahul
No,
has given
it's
us?
not. No.
Is it of any use for the principal? Will it help
No.
principal to take shortlist the student for admission?
No.
No. So it is not necessary that every time whatever is the processed data that comes out of the process need not be information. So if you stick to the previous definition of information, that would be inappropriate. What is the definition that we have taken? Quick, what is the definition that we have written for information? What is information we have said?
Information is
data.
process data.
Process data. Now tell me, Rahul did carry out some process, but the output that he has generated, is it information now? Yes or no? Is it information for the
No.
principal? No.
No.
How would you define information? So our definition of information was incomplete. It was processed data. Yeah, you'll always get information after processing data. But every time you process data, there is no guarantee what you'll get is information. Are you all getting me what I'm trying to say?
Yes.
If you just carry out some process, that does not mean what you get out of it has to be information. That is not necessary. It need not be only information. What has come out of that particular process? So what is information? It
So
is
the
process
data
data.
needs to be meaningful too.
Data was meaningful. Na? We had 1000 students ka form tha, so data was meaningful. We had correctly got the forms filled from the student. Data was correct.
Necessary data.
Necessary data. Okay. That's somewhere near to the answer.
Process data which matches the requirement,
Which matches or which fulfills.
which fulfills.
Correct. So it is data represented as per user request. Simple definition. Hai?
Yes.
Process should carry out operation data so that the output that we get should be as per the user request. We never know for what purpose the user has asked for that information. What is the principal going to do with that? We are not concerned. Principal has asked for list of all the students in descending order of their roll numbers along with their name. So we should just do that operation and give it to the principal. Let him decide what is to be done with that particular information that we are giving to him. So the right definition for information is data represented as per user request. The simplest definition. Do you all agree?
Yes.
Data represented as per user request. So who is the user, whatever he has asked for. So if you represent data as per user request, that becomes information for that particular user. If it is not fulfilling the user request, then that's not information for that user. It could be information for somebody else, but not for that particular user. So data represented as per user request. Data represented as per user request. That's information for us. So another definition for information, after process you should write again. So what is information? Data represented as per user request. Try to understand. Information is processed data. Information is processed data. Information is processed data. That is output of a process. That is output of a process. Output of one process may act as input of another process, may act as input of another process. So if you have something, whether it's data or information, will be relative to the process under consideration. In our case, for the process 1, we had the 1,000 forms. That was the data. And for process 2, that list of students in deciding out of their percentage was the input data. Okay. So what is the last statement that you have written? Read out for me. Last statement.
Output of one process may act as a input for another process.
As input for another process. Okay. So information and data, these terms are different and they are relative to the process under consideration. Okay, information data is related to the process under consideration. So process 1 के लिए data was different, information was different, and process 2 के लिए process 1 का जो information था, that was data, that was input. Now, while we are talking about these operations, we said data is collection of facts and figures. But what kind of facts and figures? Such collection of facts and figures which can undergo a process to produce meaningful information. If I have some data on which I cannot carry out any kind of operations to generate any meaningful output of it, then that is not data for me. So we are again revising the definition of data. Write down data. It is collection of facts and figures. It is such a collection of facts and figures. It is such a collection of facts and figures which can undergo a process to generate meaningful information. Can undergo a process to generate meaningful information, not just any information, meaningful. जो मेरी जरूरत है, meaningful information. Just collecting some numbers and some characters will not do. It should be such a collection on which we can carry out operation and generate.
Sir, can you
some,
please repeat?
Anybody read out? जिसने लिखा है?
Data is such a collection of facts and figures which undergo a process
Which can undergo a process
which generates meaningful information.
with meaningful information. It is such a collection of facts and figures which can undergo a process to generate meaningful information. Which can undergo a process to generate meaningful information. To generate meaningful information. Everybody with me? Is the clarity between the term data, information, process? Because we are going to create those processes, correct? But now keep in mind, when I collected information of the students, we had name of the student. The name was sequence of characters. Yes or no?
Yes.
We had
Yes.
percentage marks of the student. That was a real number. Somebody got 76%, somebody got 76.2%, somebody got 76.23%. Yes or no? And then every form
Yes.
had a number. The first form had form number 1, second had form number 2, third had form number 3. Will not have form number 1.1, 1.2, 1.02. That kind of form number will not be there. That means the data that we have collected is also of different types. It will also have some characteristics. That means data is also of different types And that introduces us to another topic called as data types. So there are different types of data. And what is the type of data that will decide what operations can you carry out on the data. If I have a data which is of type integer, a number, I can add those numbers, I can multiply those numbers. And if I have data which is of type string, Anil and Sunil, I'm going to add Anil plus Sunil, Anil minus Sunil, Anil into Sunil, Sunil 3 times. Depending on what is the type of data, we can identify what operations can we perform on the data and what operations we cannot perform on the data. It is also equally important for us to know. It is also equally important for us to know the type of data. So unless and until we are not aware about the type of data, we will not be in a position to carry out operation of the data, or rather we will not be in a position to identify. Will not be in a position to identify whether that particular operation is valid or not. Whether a particular operation is valid or not. Okay. So we are talking about data types. So data also has type. And depending on the type of data, we can identify what operations are valid and what operations are invalid. Okay. So let's talk about data types. Okay, a brief about data types. Data types. To process solution, computer must have data. We said the very reason why we write programs because there is some data on which you would like to carry out operations. So if you want to process, that means carry out some operation, you need to have data. Data is unorganized facts. They go into the computer as input and are processed by the program. So program is going to carry out that manipulation, and what it returns to the user is output or information. So what you're going to get out as an information. This information is imprinted in the form of reports or send it as a message, whatever it may be the case. So you have data that goes the input to the process carries a transformation on it, and what it generates is a report, and that's an output that we have got. But then there are different types of data that we're going to come across. Data the computer uses are of many different types. The common and computers must be told the data type of each variable and constant. So we also need to understand what is this term variable and constant. Okay, constant is the number 7. Anil, these are all constants, these are values. So even these values have some type. Anil is a string. Grade A is a character. Percentage Anil has secured 79%, that's a 79.2, that's a real number. His roll number is 5, that's an integer. So the most commonly used data types are numeric, characters, and logical. These are different types of data that we normally come across, and we should be in a position to differentiate between them. So when I talk about numeric data include all the types of numbers. Numeric is the only data type that can be used in numerical calculation, multiplication, division, mod, all these kind of operations that you want to do. I'll be in a position to carry out on numeric data, not on character data. I cannot say A mod B, Anil mod Sunil, Anil mod 2. I cannot do that. Anil minus 2. So in numeric data, we have two different types, aka integer or those are real numbers. So if I take integers like 376 is one number, minus 5 is another number, 297 is another number, but this is integer, whole number. And they can be positive as negative. They say minus 5 is negative, 376 is positive. But if I talk about real number, they are also called as floating point numbers, or whole numbers plus decimal part, like pi 3.14. Okay, like 79.6%. These are all real numbers that we have. So we have different types of data. It is not like data is just of one type and we just use and carry out same operation all the data. That is not the case. Data are all of different type. You have character data like A, B, C, D. They could be characters. You have string type of data where there are more than one characters which are put together. Okay, there could be Anil, that's more than one characters. There can be logical data like true and false. So there are different types of data that we are going to come across. But in this particular definition, okay, did we write anything about data type right now? Did we write anything about data types?
No, sir.
So let's write few lines about data types before you go. I hope you understood the concept though.
Yes.
Have you understood the concept?
Yes.
Yes, I don't see that इन द आंसर सच्ची में समझ में आ गया क्या? अगर कोई डाउट है तो पूछिएगा. कौस्तुभ एंड रोहित
Yes,
कोई
sir.
डाउट है? ओके, कौस्तुभ. ओके, let's write about data types. Data types, right? No? Data types. Data types. Or don't say data types. Every data has a type. Every data has a type. Data type describes the nature of the data. Data type describes the nature of the data. Data type describes the nature of the data and specifies the type of operations that can be carried out on the data, and specifies the type of operations that can be carried out on the data, and specifies the type of operations that can be carried out on the data. Ashish, you are not taking notes? याद नहीं रहता है सारा. Mark my word. You may understand, but वो reproduce नहीं कर पाए कहीं तो मुश्किल हो जाता है. Specifies the type of operations. What did I say?
Describe nature of data.
Types of operations that can be carried out on the data.
So data specifies the type of operation that can be carried on the data. So if I have a string, I can compare strings, but I cannot multiply string. If I have integers, I can compare integers. I can also carry out operation of multiplication on the integers. So data specifies the nature of the data. It also tells us what kind of operations can be carried on the data. So it will tell us what operations are valid and what operations are not valid. Now, when we talk about data, and on the data we don't need to carry out operations. So there is a roll number that is 76, and we have Shashwat. His surname is Goe. So I want to store that Goe. I want to store the Shashwat. Okay, his name I would like to store. His roll number I would like to store. His percentage marks I would like to store. So where are we going to store? Are we going to write it on a piece of paper while you're running the program? So that needs to be stored in the computer memory so that your processor can read the data and carry out operation on the data. So for the program, we said programs are nothing but programs carry out manipulation of the data. But actually who carries out manipulation is the processor. And through the program, we are actually giving instruction to the processor, telling the processor, please carry out this operation on my data. Yes or no? In a way, we are instructing the processor, what is the operation that you would like to carry out? Now, if you're going to instruct the processor and tell the processor through your program, please do this operation, addition karo, multiplication karo, and the processor is going to carry out that operation. But the restriction is processor can operate on the data, only the data which is stored inside the RAM, not the data which is on the hard disk or with you or something like that. So the data needs to be stored in the memory, primary memory, that is RAM. Because processor works on a principle of fetch and execute. It fetches the data from the RAM and then it carries out operation, executes those instructions to carry out operation on the data. So the data needs to be represented in the memory. Now, if I store the data in the memory, how will the processor know where in the memory have you stored that particular data? So that's another big problem. You have 16 GB memory. That means you have 16 into 10 to the power 9. That means number of bytes what you have. Now, if that means number of bytes of memory I have, where exactly have I stored that particular data? How will you tell the processor, go and take that data from that location in the memory? Now, keeping in mind the location, that is the address in the RAM where the data has been stored, could be very, very tedious. Could be very, very tedious, very difficult. So instead, what we do is to make this particular life easy for the programmers. Early days, we actually had to specify the location in the memory where the data has been stored. That's what we had to do. That was the generation of programmers who were writing programs even before I started writing programs. That means say early 60s and early 70s, late 70s, early 70s, 80s, 70s, those time when the programs were written, the programmer had to specify what is the data and where in the memory the data has been stored, so that the processor could read the data from that location in the memory and then carry out operation. That means you need to understand all that memory mechanisms and everything to instruct the computer from where to take the data. You need to know about the registers and everything. Life was difficult then. But for you, your generation, life is easy. For my generation, the life was easy. Why? Because we use concept of variables. We use concept of variable. Now, after all this discussion, we are now going to start with the discussion of concept of variables. So even before I go ahead with describing what exactly a variable is, anybody wants to make an attempt to answer what is a variable? It shouldn't take so much.
Variable is used to store data, which can be changed anytime, anywhere you want in the code.
Very good. Anybody else would like to add to it?
A variable which is stored a memory location of that value that we
Okay.
assign the variable.
Okay. Anybody else? Make an attempt. What is a variable according to you? Ashish and Bhagyashree has made an attempt. Rahul, bataiye. Aditya, bataiye.
So input given by user to store.
Given by user to store. Okay. Raj? Audible? Prithviraj?
Yes.
What is variable? How do you define variable? What is a variable according to you?
Variable is in which something can be stored and changed whenever want.
So that's you go with Ashish, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And Bhagyashree is correct. Both of you are not correct. Look at this. You are saying variable is something in which I can store some value and I can change whenever I want. That may be true, that may not be true. I can also create variables in which I will store a value, but the variable will be such whose value can never be changed. So whether we can change the value of the variable or we cannot change the value of the variable, that has nothing to do with what is a variable. I know why you both made that mistake. The reason is variable, something that can vary. You probably are good in English. So based on that, you're making a guess. Variable who can vary, that has nothing to do with the concept of variable. It is not necessary what you store in the variable should be variable. That means we should in a position to change. ऐसा कोई जरूरी नहीं है. We can create variables such that its value can never change, even if you want to. So what is exactly a variable? What Bhagyashree was trying to say is a variable. Variable is nothing but name that we give to some location in the memory where we have stored some data. So in the memory, there will be some location where we have stored some data, and we plan to tell the computer, go to that particular location and get that data so that you can carry out operations that you would like to carry out. So variables are nothing but named locations in the memory.
Sir,
yes, please.
सर आप जो बोल रहे कि चेंज नहीं होएगा वैल्यू,
हाँ.
तो सर आप स्टैटिक वेरिएबल की बात कर रहे हैं क्या?
नहीं, कांस्टेंट वेरिएबल की बात कर रहा हूं.
अच्छा.
स्टैटिक की भी वैल्यू चेंज हो सकती है. स्टैटिक कांस्टेंट है तो नहीं हो सकती है. There are concepts like constant variables, variables whose value will not change. There is a non-constant variable whose value will change. So that's a property of a variable. Value may change or may not change. That's a property depending on different languages. And almost all languages will provide this particular facility. Two types of variables. Variables whose values can change and variables whose value will not change. But what is a variable? It is nothing but a name given to some location memory. Say Rahul accepts the first value, stores it at address 7000. Rahul accepts the second value, stores it at address 5000. Remembering that exact location 5000, 700, 7000 will be difficult because actually these addresses may be very large. They are in hex, OX, FFEE, OX, FFFF. अरे कैसे याद रखेंगे कौन से एड्रेस पे हमने क्या रखा है? It is very difficult to recollect or memorize which location have you stored something. Plus, it is also difficult to ensure the location where you plan to store is that particular location free to store the data. So instead, we'll pass on that particular responsibility to the compiler, to the linker, to the process, to the machine, saying that I plan to store the data. That data is going to be of type integer. By using the data type, I'll say it's going to be of type integer. And you store the location wherever you want to store in the memory. Just make sure that block of memory has been given a name as number 1. Second place, I want to store name. So store the name wherever you want. Say it is stored at address 7000, whatever address, we are not concerned. Just make sure that address is given a name as student name. So next time when I want to fetch the roll number, I'm not going to search in the RAM. I'll say roll number. It's like a dictionary. You say roll number, the roll number corresponding to address. So you'll get the value at that address. So if I have to put it across diagrammatically, I could put it across something like this. I could put it across something like this. Here you go. I'll say if this is this entire board is the RAM, white board is the RAM, say this is one variable in which I plan to store roll number. So variable, I'll say this is roll number. So I call this as roll number. But what is roll number? Roll number is just a name. This name refers to some location memory. Say this is the location memory, maybe OXFFEE. That's the location memory to which we are given a name called as roll. And inside this particular location, you have stored the roll number. His roll number was suppose 1001. That was the roll number. So some location in the RAM, the value has been stored. Value is 1001. That's the value that has been stored. Yeah, his roll number was 1221. That was his roll number. So that roll number was stored at address OXFFEE. And roll number was nothing but name given to that location at which the value has been stored. So henceforth in the program, whenever I require the value 1221, I'll not worry about the roll number, the address. I'll say roll number. Moment I say roll number, I'll get the value which is stored at this address. And this is the value that I'll get. So likewise, we also wanted to store the name. So I have created another variable. That was student name, and that was pretty large. There was more memory that was allocated for this variable. We'll talk about how to allocate more memory and other things. That variable was given a name, and that was suppose student name. That is the name of the variable. Student name. That's the name of the variable. This particular variable has been stored at some other address. This particular thing has been stored at some other address. FFDD is a E and this is DD. And inside this particular variable, probably you have stored the name of the student. It was supposed Sarthak. Okay. Or the complete name. Suppose Sarthak, Goye, and so on. So student name, I could also reduce the size of the variable. His name is not that long. So student name is a name given to this location memory where this particular value has been stored. Roll number is the name given to this location memory where this value has been stored. So in the program, when you refer to roll number, we are actually referring to value which is stored at this address. When I say student name, we are actually referring to a value which is stored at address. That's Sarthak Goye. So in the program, we will only use the name and the computer will find the address. And once you get the address, it will give you the value which is stored at that address. So variable names are only identifiers. So first, what is a variable? Variable is a name given to a location memory where some data has been stored. Data may be of various form. Right now we have integer. Sometimes we have string. Sometimes we have real numbers. So variables hold data. Variables store data. That's correct. Variables hold data. But what is a variable? It is just a name given to a location where the data has been stored. Everybody? Anybody has any questions? Any question, anybody? Okay, let's write about variables. Your heading is variables. Right on. Variables are named location memory named locations in the memory
Sir, can you please repeat?
variables are named 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 locations in the memory variables are named locations in the memory which is used to store data. Used to store data. They are named location memory which are used to store data. Which are used to store data. So they are nothing but named memory locations. They are nothing but named memory location. So in the program, when we refer to the name, what you actually get is the value that is stored at that location. So you give the name and the program takes the value at that location. We don't add A plus B. When I say A plus B, A and B refer to some location memory. So we are actually going to get the value at that location in the memory to which we have given a name A and another location memory to which we have given a name as B. The variables are named memory locations. Location memory to which we have given name and we are fetching values from that location in the memory. So this concept of variables. Yes or no? Yes or no? Kuch to bolo. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Aram remains. Okay. Let's proceed further. Let's look at the definitions and some more points regarding variables. So let's run through some slides. I may have missed out something. Let's see. Variables. They are building blocks of the equation and expression that ultimately makes up solution to a computer problem. When I say A plus B, so I've created an expression. So they are the building blocks of that expression that makes up the solution. A plus B, A and B are two variables. The programmer defined each constant and variable in the program problem solution as a particular data type, such as numeric or character. We talk about data types. So we'll create a variable. We'll have to specify what is the type of the variable, whether it's numeric, whether it's character, whether it's alphanumeric. Now, depending on the language, different languages have different abilities. Some languages can differentiate between more different types of data. Some language can understand difference between date and time. Some language cannot understand difference between date and time. Some language can understand difference between a character and a string. Some languages don't understand what's a character. For them, everything is string. A string with single character is a character string, and string with multiple characters is also a string. So that depends. So each language is different than other language, and every language can differentiate between different types of data. Operators are combined with these constants and variables to create expressions and equation. If I say A plus B, so plus is an operator. A and B are variables, but I could say A plus 5, where 5 is a constant whose value will never change. Value of A can change, but 5 plus A, 5 is a value that's constant, A is a variable, and plus is an operator. So you'll be creating expressions, you'll be creating equations, and these expressions and equations can be created using variables, constants, and operators. So operators specify what operations do you plan to carry out on that particular data. But what is a variable? It is a memory location which has been named so whose contents can vary, also called as identifier. So whose content can vary, not has to vary. Because we can create a variable whose contents do not vary. Can vary. If you wish, you can create a variable whose variable can vary, may vary. Not necessarily it has to vary. The variable need not necessarily be something whose value can change. But they are called as identifiers. So every variable name is an identifier. Why? Because it identifies the location memory where the data has been stored. Right on? Variables are identifiers. Variables are identifiers. They identify Variables are identifiers. They identify the location in the memory where the data is stored. Identify the location in the memory where the data is stored. Identify the location in the memory where the data is stored. How do you give the name to the variable? They are named locations. So we need to give a name. So every language will have different rules as to how can you give a name. Depending on what characters can be used in the variable name, what can be the maximum length, should we have uppercase or lowercase, is this case sensitive or not? So that will vary from one language to another. Variable name must be a single word, but can be formed by several other words. Like I can create a variable name saying rate, R-A-T, all alphabets. I can say interest rate. This is called as camel casing, lower camel case. Note the I is small and R is capital. Interest rate mein I is small, R is capital. This is called as lower camel case. That means you have joined more than one words, and to make them readable, every new word's first letter is made capital. So interest rate, there are no space in between. There are no space in between. You want to give a space, put an underscore saying interest underscore rate. This becomes camel casing. Please note, the first was this becomes snake case. The first was a regular variable. Second one, the naming convention that we have used is lower camel case. If I put I also as capital, it will become upper camel case. The first letters, first words, first letter is small. Subsequent words, first letter is capital. That becomes lower camel case. If I was capital, here interest statement, if I was capital, it could have become upper camel case. And here everything is small. We put underscore, that's called a snake case. So different convention names that are being used. So a lower camel case, what we have used, the first interest rate. The second interest rate is snake case. If I would have been capital in this interest rate first wala interest rate for the I capital tha, it could have been called as upper camel case. So you will be using some convention for variable names. We never use upper camel case. We normally start with either lower camel case or the snake case is what we use in all the programming languages when you try and define variables. But there are some naming conventions that we should follow. Variable name should be meaningful. So henceforth, you will never create variable like I, X, J, K, okay, Y. These are very popular names, but they are not meaningful. You will never create such variables unless they have no meaning. So if you are going to store somebody's age, I will not create variable as A. I'll rather say age. I'll say age of the student, age of the person. So that name should be meaningful. Embedded space is not allowed. So I cannot create a variable saying age space of space student. You cannot have spaces in between. No embedded space allowed. Start the variable name with a letter. So I can create a variable something like this. Watch it. I can create a variable something like this. I can say number 1. That's okay. I can create a variable saying num1 data. That's also okay. But I will never create a variable saying 1 num. No language, most of the language will not allow you to create a variable who starts with a letter. You can start with alphabets. You have to start with a letter. You can have digits in between, but variable name should not start with a digit, a letter. It should not start with a digit. 1 num is not something which is valid. Number 1 data is okay. Number 1 is okay. Number underscore 1 is also okay. Okay. Underscore num is also okay. But it should not start with digits. So that's a precaution that we should take. Variable name, start variable name with letters. That's a convention in most of the languages. So we'll also follow the same conventions. Do not use dash or special symbols or symbols used to represent mathematical operations. That means don't create a variable something like this. I say somebody's name is FIRST first name. Look at this, the way I have given. That's lower camel case. I could have given the same variable name by saying FIRST first underscore name. Okay, that's also okay. Camel snake case. But don't define variables as first space name. That's not allowed. Don't even say first dash name. No, dash for you is a dash, for machine it could be minus sign. So no dash. Don't say I have a variable saying first plus name, don't do that. Yeah, first equal to name, no. The only symbol that we would probably use is underscore. And some languages allow you to use dollar. Okay, nothing more than that. So you can have alphabets, you can have digits, and you can have underscore. Some languages also allow you to use dollar, say first dollar name, that's allowed in some languages. But then most of the languages will stick to what we are just now seeing. Okay, avoid unnecessary or wrong naming conventions. So stick to some basics. So do not use dash or special symbol or symbol used to represent mathematical operation, plus, minus, into, divide. Never have these symbols in your variable names. So these are few common conventions that you have to keep in mind while you define variables. But we talked about constants. So what is a constant? Constant is a value that is specific, alphabetic or numeric value. Your grade that you secured in the last semester, your grade was A. That's a constant. A is a constant. Grade is a variable. A is a constant. Your roll number is 5. Roll number is a variable, but that value 5 is a constant. Values never change. Variable can change. Variable today is holding one value, tomorrow it may hold another value. That's okay. Value is fixed. Never during values, constant is a value that is specific alphabetic numeric value that never change during the processing of all instructions in the solution. So it is a representation of the data that does not change throughout the life of the program. And constants also have type. Roll number 7, 7 is integer. Name Anil, Anil is string. Grade A plus, yeah, A is a character that's of type character. So constants are also having data types, numeric, alphabetic, symbols, whatever it may be. In some programming language and applications, constants can be named. This allows you easier access to the constants. So we can have constant variables. Constants can be named. So to that constant, we can give a name. So that's also possible, but that can be a constant to which we have given a name. And the conventions are different. In most of the languages, when you try and give a name to a constant, or when you just give a name to a constant, don't even create variables. Some languages allow you to create constant variables, but you just give a name to a constant, then we'll use in capital letters. Now, how do I write it in capital letters? I would write something like this. Suppose there was a constant that I had to define called as pi, value of pi. So I'll say pi, capital, pi. Okay, instead of saying small case, I'll use all letters in capital. So most of the time, when you see all letters in capital, it is trying to indicate to us that it is a constant whose value we do not plan to change. So that was a basic introduction to the concept of data types, the data, process, information. Then we talked about what is a variable, what is a constants, things. Now it's time for us to move in for algorithms and flowcharts. So we go ahead expressing our logic. Okay. And this is where we plan to take up some assignments. Okay. Just to begin with, what I would do is I would rather go ahead with since we know what is an algorithm, and we have also seen what is a flowchart and a pseudocode. Flowcharts were graphical representation of the data, and pseudocodes were graphical representation of the program logic, and pseudocodes were representation of program logic in simple English like language. So algorithms, instructions that cannot assume anything, cannot skip steps, must be executed one step at a time, and must be complete. So your instruction should not be halfway through, it should be complete. At one time you can execute instruction, you cannot skip any instruction, neither can you assume anything. To be understood by the computer, the instruction had to be written according to certain rules. So we'll also try and write our algorithm based on those rules. So there are two ways to represent algorithm. One is flowchart, another is pseudocode. One is flowchart, another is pseudocode. And flowchart was graphical or pictorial representation of program logic. And pseudocode is representation of program logic in simple English like language. Right on? There are two ways. Given heading as algorithm, there are two ways of representing an algorithm. There are two ways of representing an algorithm. First is flowchart. Put a dash in front of flowchart and write down flowchart. It is graphical or pictorial. It is graphical or pictorial representation of program logic. It is graphical or pictorial representation of program logic. Representation of program logic. So every picture will have some meaning. It's a graphical or pictorial representation of program logic. And second, pseudocode. It is a representation of program logic in simple English-like language. Pseudocode. Pseudo मतलब नकली. Code. तो ये नकली code है. Pseudocode. It's a representation of program logic in simple English-like language. Present a program logic in simple English-like language. Now, when you talk about flowchart, there are some symbols that we should be aware of. There are these flow lines. Now, draw these flow lines. These flow lines show the direction of flow of data and instruction. आपका data and instruction कैसे कहाँ से start हो रहा है कहाँ जा रहा है for flow lines. We have symbols like start and stop. So we use this kind of flattened ellipse to show there is where we start and there is where we stop. So normally these symbols are used for start and stop. Then there is square box that's meant for processing. Rectangle or square box is meant for processing, process. If there is a parallelogram, that's meant for either input or output. Okay, note because we are now going to use all of those symbols. If there is a parallelogram, that's meant for IO, input output. If there is a square or a rectangle, that's meant for process. Then if I have something like this, two vertical line, that's a module, a function.
Parallelogram is used for
Input or output. That will represent input or output operation. And then if you have a rectangle with two lines on the sides, that could represent a module. Some places it will be represented slightly in a different way. And if there is a line at the top, that could be like operation of defining. If there is a horizontal line also at the top, that could be operation of defining. But normally this is how we define a process. Then if you see this kind of polygon, कितने साइड से 1 2 3 4 5 6 साइड का अगर ऐसा पॉलीगॉन दिखाई दे तो अंडरस्टैंड इट्स अ लूपिंग कंस्ट्रक्ट. इट्स अ लूपिंग कंस्ट्रक्ट. इट्स अ लूपिंग कंस्ट्रक्ट. अगर ऐसा कुछ दिखाई दे इट्स अ लूपिंग कंस्ट्रक्ट. से लूपिंग कंडीशन. इट्स अ लूपिंग कंडीशन. अगर ऐसा आ गया डायमंड आ जाए so that's a decision condition. That means it's a selection condition. Decision, selection condition. तो looping condition रहेगा तो that polygon. और अगर आपने diamond निकाला, in that case it's a decision. That's a selection condition. If you have circle, that's on page connector. And if you have this particular symbol, that's off page connector. I'll explain you what is on page and off page. But एक है on page connector, दूसरा है off page connector. लिख के रखो, we'll be using them. एक है ऑन पेज कनेक्टर, दूसरा है ऑफ पेज कनेक्टर. एक है ऑन पेज और दूसरा है ऑफ पेज कनेक्टर. Say you are writing a code and your first page gets over and now you want to continue the next, so you use off page connector. You will put a number 2 on this and with the same symbol on the next page, you will put that same number and you will continue. But within the same page, you would like to write some part over here and some part on other things. You can use on page connector, circle. For circle, you say the next part is on the same page. And the symbol that I given at the bottom, that will say, carry the next part of the logic is on another page. So on page connector and off page connector. Two different types of connectors is what we use. It's 9:30 today. We'll stop over here today and we'll make, or I'll take one example and stop. क्या करें? Should we continue? Should we stop? Right. Now, the next stage could be like take examples and draw those flowcharts and pseudocodes. So do you want me to start with pseudocodes and flowcharts examples tomorrow, or should we continue right away? Tick करो, continue करना है, cross करो, stop करना है. We'll go by majority. काटे की takkare 5-4. There are some decision makers now. Rohit, Sairam are decision makers. Make your choice, Rohit and Sairam. Your vote will decide where will we go, what will we do. Rohit and Sairam are not ready to give a vote. So it's
Waiting for Saira.
waiting for that. Okay. The majority is no. 5-4 hai. So we'll take it tomorrow when we meet. So tomorrow we'll go ahead with exercises. And there are some interesting tools you must have downloaded. I hope all of you have downloaded both the tools.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Anybody has any difficulty with those
Yes,
tools?
sir, but there was no icon for logarithm. It got installed in my system.
Okay. Then in that case, I'll share you an exe file. You will not install, you can still work. Without installation also you can work. I'll share that file. Shall I share it right away?
Yes, sir.
I'll share with you all a file that does not require installation and you can still work with it. Huh? I'll just share that file quickly. So there is a exe file. You can just double click and run. It does not even require installation. I don't know whether I can share it through Zoom. देखते हैं एक बार try करके. If such files are allowed to be shared or not, I don't know. Let me check. I think it will work. So you don't even have to install. So don't worry if it doesn't reflect. No. Transfers of exe file is restricted by the account admin. Exe file cannot be shared. So shall I share on the WhatsApp group?
Yes, sir. Yes,
WhatsApp
sir.
पे आ जाएगा नहीं exe file या नहीं?
आ जाएगा. आ जाएगा.
WhatsApp web. WhatsApp group name? Career course, na?
Career course. And another one is logic.
Career course. Sharing that file. That's just an exe file directly. Rohit, you need not install it. You can just double click and use it. Okay. Here's logic. 2023, Monica?
Yes, sir. Logic development 2023.
So in both the places, I have shared this exe file. So Rohit, your problem will be solved. You can just double click and use it. There is no installation required. Okay. So make sure you have both the tools installed on your machine. I want it to be installed, or at least this exe file. And tomorrow we'll play around with them. And I'll show you the power of AI also tomorrow. क्या आजकल नया हो रहा है. These tools are like so fantastic. They do such exciting stuff. And you'll realize how important it is to know the algorithm. Because coding can just happen automatically. Its coding is very simple. It's just translation. So we'll see that powerful features tomorrow in Meet. With that note, we'll stop over here today. See you tomorrow. Thank you all for another session. Don't miss tomorrow's session because from tomorrow onwards, we take at least 100 different problems we'll plan to solve. That's our objective. अपना count रखेंगे, target रखेंगे, 100 problems हम लोग solve करेंगे. And believe me, when you solve 100 problems, you'll be super confident as to how to tackle the problems. You will not face any issue handling any question that comes across in front of you. मेरा target है आपसे 100 problems solve करवाने का. We'll discuss, not just solve, we'll discuss those solutions.
Every day 100 problems.
Hey, every day 100 problems. Machine एक है. Total 100 problems in the course, I said. Every day 100 problems. 100 problem statement तरी सांगू शकेल का दिवसाला. In the total course, we will solve 100 problems. Okay. Start करते हैं भाई. Okay. That note, we'll stop here today. See you tomorrow. Take care. Love you all. Bye. Hey, hold on. We did not take your feedback. What happened today? What was your takeaway?
Yes.
Shashwat, what was your takeaway?
Sir, we today learn about the difference between the data and the information. Where
You need to
data
tell me
is-
what you felt great about. हाँ, ये अच्छा लगा आज. That's what you want to tell. You need to tell me. काय सर सगळं फालतू होतं. काय सांगायचं, काय चांगलं वाटलं नाही वाटलं. आदित्य
Yes, sir. Today my learning was about about data, and data types also. Mm, and sir, flowcharts and symbols.
Okay. Ruturaj,
Proper definition of variable
proper definition of variable. Okay.
and
Definition of
data,
data. Huh? And
data types.
data types. Data का नहीं clarity आया? Difference between data and information.
Yes, yes. Information data process.
Okay. Ashish.
All that.
So exact difference between data and information,
Exact difference between data and information. Okay.
and the proper definition of variable.
Proper definition of variable. Okay. Monica.
Sir, variables that they allocate some memory. Just a minute, sir.
Sairam.
So there is some disturbance at my end. That's why I
Okay,
couldn't
okay.
able to answer.
Okay.
Symbols of flowchart.
Symbols of flowcharts. Okay. That we'll be using now and we'll become masters in them. Shreyash.
So learned about we learned about the difference between data and information, and
Okay.
about variables, algorithm, flowchart symbols and all that.
So be very careful next time when you use this term. You are from IT background. You are not a layman. So इस term सही use करना है. सही जगह पे data है तो data, information तो information. भाग्यश्री.
So difference between data process and information. That is important.
That flow, correct? And that is the basics of computers. Data है, process है और information है. Okay. Anything else? With that note, we'll stop here today. See you tomorrow. Take care. Love you all. Bye-bye.